please turn off any cell phones or electronic devices at this time that may interrupt the program. My name is Thanuj Parikh. I'm a junior at the college and the chair of the South Asian Men's Collective, and I'd like to welcome you to the Step It Up awareness event, and thank you all for being here for what I'm sure will be a fantastic evening of discussion. Before we begin the program, I'd like to just briefly explain the history of Step It Up and how this event came about. Last winter, representatives from the Harvard AIDS Coalition approached SAMIC and BMF to begin brainstorming ideas about how we, as Harvard students, could immediately and tangibly engage ourselves in the fight against HIV/AIDS. This meeting was made all the more prevalent because, as we all know, the world's most afflicted regions are Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. What resulted from this first meeting, and subsequently several months of long and difficult planning, is an unprecedented student collaboration, the likes of which I don't think has been seen at Harvard in a very long time. In addition to SAMIC, BMF, and HAC, this weekend's events are co-sponsored by the Nigerian Students Association, the Association of Black Harvard Women, Native Americans at Harvard College, and the South Asian Women's Collective. As we sat together over the several months trying to figure out how we want to shape this event and what we want to do here, we said to ourselves, how can we take advantage of this unbelievable energy that we've brought together? So many different student groups from so many different backgrounds united under one cause. And we said, everything we do is going to have to be bigger, better, and just, if you guys have seen our promo video, it's like the Kanye song. It has to be harder, better, faster, stronger. We just have to do it like that. So we said, to that end, it's not just going to be one night. It's going to be a multi-pronged initiative. Step It Up is actually 3 separate events. The first 2 are taking place this evening, and in a moment, Brian will explain about those. The third event is a benefit dance taking place this weekend. Now again, for anyone who's familiar with the college, SAMIC and BMF individually, we can sell out a dining hall, no problem, a regular dining hall. We have to go bigger, we have to go better. We said, where can we go? What's the best place on campus? We picked Annenberg, the biggest hall on campus, and probably the most recognizable Harvard building from all of their campuses. I know I'm supposed to be keeping this short, but I do have to make a quick plug about the dance. The dance is this Saturday evening. It's 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. It is open to all Harvard undergrads, as well as anyone with a valid college ID. If you're not a Harvard student, must be escorted in by a Harvard guest. Advance tickets, which are $7, are nearly sold out. We have a few remaining at the table here at the end of the night. But have no fear, there are plenty, and I mean plenty of tickets available at the door Saturday night. Proceeds from the benefit dance will be going to 2 fantastic organizations. The first is Partners in Health, which is world-renowned for its treatment of HIV patients. The second is the Treatment Action Campaign. It's a South African-based NGO known also for its treatment program, but also for its political advocacy component. Finally, you may have noticed several students around the hall as you came in wearing these HIV-positive t-shirts. There should have been little flyers on your seats explaining the history behind them. But in essence, we wear these shirts here tonight to recognize the stigma that still exists in the world today about HIV/AIDS awareness, and to signal to you that we're making the step towards breaking that stigma, and also to send the message that we as Harvard students feel positively about the future of HIV/AIDS and the fight against it. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Brian Barnhill, a senior at the college and the president of the Black Men's Forum.
Thank you. When Thanuj and members of the Harvard AIDS Coalition came to me with the idea of Step It Up, I was very impressed and excited to be on board. Here, I thought that the concept would be utterly unique and, in fact, revolutionary. Often in the classroom, when we engage with matters of grave social importance, we read about them, talk about them, then write about them. And unfortunately, when we try to deal with those same issues outside the classroom, a similar pattern ensues. But it is the core focus of Step It Up to meet intellectual engagement with constructive action. And it is our hope that the spirit of Step It Up become a part of the Harvard student identity. We really want to send a jolt across the campus and get students to realize that they don't have to wait until after they graduate to change the world. So we encourage you all to step it up with your engagement, step it up with your involvement, and step it up with making a difference. And with regards to the latter point, we want to present you all with the opportunity to make a difference tonight. The Senate will be entertaining a bill called the African AIDS Release Initiative, and it will pretty much release $600 million toward the retention and the training of healthcare workers. And these people will go to the countries and to the people that need the support. And what we're asking from you all is to read off of the call script that we provided you with, and you'll contact your senator. You should have the number in your seat, and you'll express to them that this is a matter of grave importance, and you would appreciate it if they lent their support with regards to the issue. So keeping in line with activism and making a difference, please allow me to present to you two students who embody the Step It Up spirit. We have Matthew Basilico and Connie Chen. Connie has been an intern for the Health Initiative in Chile, and she's also been an intern for the Clinton Foundation in Cambodia. She's been an economic research assistant for Professor Michael Kramer in Kenya, and Matt has been an intern with the Partners in Health in Haiti and in Malawi as well. He's also been an analyst for the Clinton Foundation and has served in both Kenya and Malawi. So without further ado, I introduce you to Matthew and Connie. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Brian and Tanuj, once again for that incredible introduction. And before we get into the program, I just want to make a few comments about how things will run. We'll have a 45-minute discussion between the four of us, at which point we'll open up for questions. 45-minute question and answer session. There are 4 microphones on the corners of the room, and so we'll have time for audience participation. It is now my great pleasure to introduce 2 individuals who need no introduction in the global health world. At first glance, Ira Magaziner and Paul Farmer may appear diametric opposites. Entering his 37th career,
Surprised you dress like this.
Entering his 37th career as a corporate consultant and well known for his influence in elite policy circles, Mr. Magaziner likely found himself in a boardroom or a hired car while Dr. Farmer trekked across mountains between patient visits in the rural Haitian Central Plateau. But upon closer look, the similarities between these 2 men far outweigh their differences. For one, it is now virtually impossible for either of them to walk into a room without the reputation of brilliance preceding them. Before age 23, Mr. Magaziner led the student movement which revolutionized the curriculum at Brown University to its current requirement-free structure. He was also class president, valedictorian, and named a Rhodes Scholar upon graduation, joining another notable individual at Oxford by the name of William Jefferson Clinton. After abandoning attempts to build a commune in Brockton, Massachusetts, Mr. Magaziner became a legendary corporate consultant and senior policy advisor to the president in the Clinton administration, in which he managed the plan for universal health insurance. He began the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative in 2002, which achieved dramatic reductions in the price of AIDS treatment for developing nations by 2004. But if there is one person who can match Ira Magaziner's brilliance, that man is Paul Farmer. Graduating summa cum laude in anthropology at Duke, Dr. Farmer spent a year in Haiti where he met Ophelia Dahl, with whom he would found the NGO Partners in Health. Upon entering Harvard Medical School a year later, Dr. Farmer picked up his books, boarded a plane back to Haiti, and did not return until his final exams. 6 years later, he had graduated second in his class at HMS, established the core of PIH's Partners in Health's operations in Haiti, and earned a PhD in anthropology from Harvard in 2 years. His dissertation, AIDS and Accusation, remains in print as a cornerstone of medical anthropology. Although his model of community-based healthcare in rural Haiti gained prominence for its effective treatment of tuberculosis, Dr. Farmer's HIV Equity Initiative permanently changed the course of the global health establishment when he documented some of the highest adherence rates to AIDS therapy in the world in one of the poorest areas of the Western Hemisphere. Dr. Farmer was awarded the MacArthur Genius Grant for his work in Haiti, was appointed the Maud and Lillian Professor of Social Medicine at Harvard University. His model of community-based treatment has expanded to 6 countries and become the global gold standard for healthcare delivery in resource-poor settings. Their similarities, however, extend far deeper than their brilliance. Mr. Magaziner's HIV/AIDS initiative scaled from 6 consultants in a small Quincy office in 2002 to over 600 people in 25 countries today. The majority of the initiative's employees are from the private sector, and most of these have given up 6-figure salaries for, in Mr. Magaziner's words, long hours, little pay, no credit, no vacations, the hardest work they will ever see, and a boss without a sense of humor. But as anyone who has worked for the foundation knows, no matter how long or hard you think you've worked, No matter how many all-nighters you may have pulled that in the same week, somewhere there is Ira Magaziner, curled into a coach class seat, sending one more email, preparing for one more meeting. Dr. Farmer has similarly inspired scores of the world's most capable physicians to abandon the Boston suburbs. Instead, they follow him in pragmatic solidarity to the hills of rural Haiti, the slums of Peru, the expanse of Lesotho, Rwanda, or Malawi. To estimate their mark on this world in proportion to their personal resumes would be a flagrant underestimate. They are not only the mind and bodies of their organizations, they are their hearts and souls. And as anyone who has encountered either of these two organizations knows, their ethos is their greatest strength. Mr. Magaziner and Dr. Farmer have already changed the paradigm of possibilities in global health, yet it is likely that their greatest work is yet to come. It is a tremendous honor tonight to welcome Mr. Magaziner, Chairman of the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative, and Dr. Paul Farmer, the Maud and Lillian Presley Professor of Social Medicine.
I think we ought to leave now. It can only go downhill from here. That was
So to begin, Dr. Farmer, Mr. Magaziner, and we'll start out with some easy questions before we start firing away. Could you just describe your current work and how you think your organizations are addressing challenges in global health?
Well, we work together. And that's something that Matt didn't say, is we had the good fortune to meet in 2002 at the Barcelona AIDS meeting. And then shortly thereafter, Ira and his son, Seth, his oldest son, came to Haiti. And we started talking about ways that we might work together. And it took a while, in part because we did not want to give up in our work at Partners in Health the depth that you get from setting down roots in a place and working really hard to make sure the quality of care is really good. And yet we also didn't want to miss out on this chance to really get the model scaled up. So really, since shortly thereafter, we began talking about working together in Africa. And Ira never stopped pushing. Those of you who have worked with him, and probably those who are his kin, know that he doesn't stop pushing. And in the fall of 2004, we went to Rwanda together and sealed the deal. And now we've worked together, our organizations, in 3 countries. And again, with the breadth that you need to take on a problem this big, but also with the depth that you need to make sure quality of care is good. So it's been a very exciting ride the last 2.5, 3 years, and a lot of it is due to Ira Magaziner.
I can say that when we first started our AIDS work in 2002, President Clinton was looking for what to do with his foundation that he had just formed, and he asked me to try to go out and we wanted to do something related to global poverty. And I went to see the heads of state of a number of countries that we had worked with in the White House, ready to talk about education, economic development, healthcare, a number of different areas. And a number of them said to me, if we don't solve the AIDS problem, it's going to sabotage everything else we're trying to do. Prime Minister Mukumbi of Mozambique said we have to hire 2 people for every 1 job because we expect people to get sick with AIDS. And the President of Tanzania, President Kappa, said, it's fine to talk to me about education, but right now more teachers are dying of AIDS in Tanzania than we can train every year. So unless we solve the AIDS problem, it sabotages everything. So once we decided to get into AIDS, my first stop was to go see Paul because I knew that he had probably the best model in the world on how to treat people in resource-poor settings. And we had it in mind at that time in 2002, there were only 70,000 people being treated when we started outside of Brazil and the whole developing world. And there were about 6 million people that needed treatment, so only a little over 1% of the people that needed treatment were getting it. We also understood that in order to make the treatment sustainable, that we had to develop overall a model for broad-based healthcare, not just AIDS, in resource-poor settings. And so the partnership we formed with Paul, which we'll talk, I'm sure, more about later on, was because we felt they had the best model, but Haiti was too remote for most people in Africa to relate to. So we cajoled Paul and didn't take too much to bring him to Africa and to set up in a district in Rwanda that's the poorest district in the country in partnership with the Rwandan government, a catchment area of about 400,000 people. And we've set up a rural healthcare model there, which now has been going for a couple of years and has been successful enough that the Rwandan government has now decided to scale it up to the whole country. And we also are working now in Malawi and Lesotho with a similar model. And then through other partners, we're looking to expand the model to other countries that we work in Africa. The one final piece I'll say now, and then we'll talk more depth about it later, is that the key to this is high quality care in resource poor settings that is scalable and sustainable. Right now, the healthcare budgets of most African countries are 70 to 80% foreign financed, and that's not sustainable. So what we're seeking and what we believe we can achieve together is a model that over a number of years can deliver high quality healthcare within the Rwandan GNP, that is the Rwandan government budget, and what is affordable from citizens in Rwanda, so that it can be a sustainable healthcare system that is of high quality. And working together over the next years, I'm hopeful and quite confident that we're going to achieve that goal.
Actually, I'd like to pick it up right there with the future of your collaboration. It seems like your current efforts and to scale to Africa, for those familiar with your work, has been quite impressive. But I think a question that would be on a lot of people's mind is how, when you give the example of the Rwandan government, to bring the work of an NGO that has Western funding, has some of the most highly trained individuals and a lot of political clout. Can you describe the feasibility of of this massive scale up, and how the roles of your NGOs might have to change for that? And as you mentioned, Mr. Magaziner, to do this all within the financial confines of of current donor aid.
Well, I'll start. Now that could be a topic that we could talk about all night, and maybe we will talk about all night. Well, I would say this. First of all, and I'll just go through the model that Ira laid out, but there's some ground rules. One is, if you talk about something that's scalable and sustainable, to use Ira's words, I think that it belongs in the public sector. And so you form public-private partnerships, and these are things that we've learned over the years. Ira knows a lot more about them than we do, but that's been our MO now for 10 years, has been to try and build up the public sector institutions, not to the exclusion of any other group, NGOs, civil society, whatever you'd like to call them. So that's one thing. And if you look at most countries in Africa, they do have public sector infrastructures. They're just dilapidated or falling apart. In fact, that's why we ended up in the place that we went to in Rwanda, is because it had been an abandoned hospital, abandoned since the genocide. In fact, I should introduce Dr. Bosco, who's probably snoozing. Dr. Bosco, this is my colleague who just showed up his first time in the United States, straight from Rwanda. And welcome. And I mentioned Dr. Bosco for a couple of reasons. And one is that you mentioned highly trained professionals. That's true. But our staff is pretty much 99-point-something% local. So most of them, you know this because you worked with us in these places. So rule one in the public infrastructure somehow. And people say, well, there is no public infrastructure. You go around, root around, you'll find it. It may be abandoned, it may have fallen apart, it may have mortar shells in the walls, but it's there. Number two, you need, for something to be sustainable, you need it to be local people. And that's local, not just like Dr. Bosco, who's a physician, who grew up in another part of Rwanda, but local people from these villages to be the main community health workers. I think that's another part of it. And then the list goes on into areas that Ira knows much better than I, and I'm going to pass it on to him to talk about financing, generic medications, how to build coalitions across national borders. But just to say one thing about scale up, or where we're going to go in the future, I think we're going to, unless I get fired. Can you fire me? Wait, I'm a volunteer like you. You can't fire me. We're going to keep on expanding laterally in another place, we hope. We have a lot. We've been talking over the last 2 years about where. We're also going to expand locally, again, using the district as the unit of expansion. So we're going now to 3 districts, just the PIH side, PIH Clinton side, and then the PIH Clinton Rwandan ministry side with X number of other partners. That'll be in 6 more districts within the next year. And we'd like to do the same thing in Rwanda and Malawi. But the Rwanda project is, for me, special, and I'd like to hear Ira's take on this. And he knew it was special when he sent us there. But there is a great need. There's, there's people who understand the political economy or the economy of Rwanda know the need is great. There is a history of great trauma in that country, as you all know. But there's also a government there now with a lot of political will to make this work in the public sector and also to assume in X amount of time the financing of what is a very intensive primary healthcare system. So I think of all the 9 countries in which I've worked, I hate to say this on tape, but this is the country that I think I've found to be most serious about all aspects of assisting us in the scale up. There are always going to be difficulties in every country, but I think Rwanda is unique in that regard. Or do you think I'm being overly optimistic?
Well, I think Rwanda is a very good place to work. I think there are a lot of other countries and governments that also will.
See, he's from politics. I'm from medicine.
But just to build on what Paul said, to create a successful healthcare system, there's something very important that Paul said that I want to reemphasize. And it's important for those of you who are going to go into development work. Too often, there's a sort of neo-colonial attitude in the way in which Americans and Europeans go about working in Africa or in Asia. We come in, we assume we're the experts, and we tend to start lecturing local government officials. We tend to assume that, they don't know what they're doing, they must be corrupt, they're not as educated as us, and so on. And that is a terrible thing. And it's something that leads to ultimate failure for many development efforts. And it's just not right. This is Rwanda's the Rwandans' country, and that's their government. And we are guests. And we're there to try to be helpful because we have certain skills and experience that they don't have. But we work under their leadership. And that's very important. And I always say to people who work for us, if you make a mistake in what you're doing, I understand as long as you learn from the mistake and correct it, because what we're trying to do is hard work. If you're disrespectful to one of our government partners, or Rwandan partners in that case, I'll fire you in a minute. That's the one thing that will get you fired, because we're not going to go in and be disrespectful to people in their country. We work under their leadership. And so, as Paul said, we work with the government, we work with the mainstream institutions in the country, NGOs that are local and so on. Because that's the only way it's going to be sustainable. Our job will hopefully be over at some point as foreign visitors, and we're helping accelerate a process of development in the country, but ultimately it has to be under the leadership of the local people. So the project that we have now for scaling up in Rwanda, the complementary skills that we bring, and this is part of what makes it such a great partnership, is that we have managerial skills, business skills, political skills that we can bring. Paul has tremendous, in his organization, clinical skills and knowledge about the clinical models. And that partnership gives a more totality of what you need in order to succeed in the scale-up. And we put that under the service of the local government. And that is going to allow the scale-up to take place, we think, in a very successful way.
Both of you have sort of spoken about working in different countries, and I was just wondering if you could sort of elaborate upon different challenges or different experiences that you've had in the various countries, working with different governments or in countries in different stages of development in industrialization. Have there been big differences? Or?
There have been huge differences. Just even in one country over time, say I've been working in Haiti 25 years, more than 20, a long time. And during that quarter of a century, we've had, family dictatorship, a number of military governments, none of them elected, of course, two or three elected governments, a number of post-coup governments, a government installed basically by the US administration. So you can imagine the variation when you're trying to work in the public health sector. Now, if we were just the NGO number 7,642,712, in Haiti. There probably are that many. And weren't trying to pursue this model of building up local infrastructure. We may be immune to the vicissitudes of what happens in the political situation, but we're not. We are trying to build up the public health sector. So it's been difficult even within countries. And then you go, if I think of Lesotho, I think of logistic difficulties, not political difficulties so much. Although we've had some political difficulties there. I don't think they're anywhere near as difficult as Haiti or parts of Guatemala where we've worked. I've worked in 9 countries. And it's fairly at some length, and so there's logistic problems in some, there are cultural differences in others, but there are structural problems in all of them, in the sense that there's poverty, there's inequality, there may be post-conflict situations like in Haiti, Guatemala, and Rwanda. There may be, Lesotho, which is a very beautiful country, some of you have been there, is the mountain kingdom for a reason. The first day I went there, I went with a Haitian doctor who'd worked with us for some years in central Haiti. And then he went to Rwanda, which is a very temperate place. And we flew from Kigali to Johannesburg, where he was not allowed to get out of the airport because he was a Haitian, which irritated me to no end. So we stayed up in the airport. We get off the plane, go to Lesotho, fly in a little plane up in the mountains, and it started to snow. And he looked at me like he wanted to hurt me badly. This is one of my proteges. And again, you don't think ahead that one of the problems in Rwanda is going to be, I have to be careful on one tape, it's very cold. And so that's just an example of something that it sounds silly. And he's still there, by the way, a year later working, and he loves his work now. But there are all kinds of challenges, and I think there's a list that you can make, and you can think about and do your homework ahead of time and try to figure out what the problems are likely to be. That's the least we could do, is know the history of a place and as much about its culture. And then there are going to be the problems that you don't predict. And solving them with ingenuity and respect, as Ira said, I think is one of the challenges in this kind of work.
We have a saying that, which we believe to be true, which is that intelligence and hard work are evenly distributed across the globe. It's opportunity and education that are not equally distributed. And so we find every place we go that there are good people, hardworking people, smart people who care about their country, who care about bettering themselves. And that's the ingredient that you need. And absent, obviously if you have a war situation or a civil war or something like that, then things can turn in a way that makes it almost impossible to kind of build a sustainable program. But in the absence of that, we find that you can work everywhere. And yes, there'll be some people of bad will everywhere. There's corruption everywhere. I worked in Washington for 6 years. There's corruption there. It's no better, no worse than what you'll find in Dar es Salaam or in Nairobi. It's just different, more sophisticated. But basically, these kinds of human qualities.
This is where they learn how to do it.
You see what I have to put up with in this partnership here. But
Just kidding. They said to step it up. I'm just trying to line it up.
I better stop there. But in any event, I think there are differences, but those differences can be worked with. And we find people of goodwill and systems that we can work with pretty much everywhere.
Well, Mr. Magazzini, you ended there about finding good people and that the capacity exists if kind of that opportunity is realized. And I was wondering if we could just step beyond health for a second to look at the broader complex that is development or structural violence or the different concepts that are ideas have been applied to it. Dr. Farmer, I'd propose that many people that read your writings come away inspired by the idea of structural violence. You once said that.
Gee, no one has ever said that to me before, Matt. What an inspiring idea. Go ahead. So cheerful.
For example, when you said inequality itself constitutes our modern plague. But some people who look at your work and notice that the size of the program on social and economic rights, which is in which funding is allocated directly towards the types of systems and structures that put people, in a place where they'll become infected in the first place. that the program for that is very small compared to the overall health budget of Partners in Health. Mr. Magaziner, similarly, a new direction that the Clinton Foundation has taken recently is the Clinton Hunter Development Initiative, which has a 4 to 5 pronged approach, including education, agriculture, and clearly there's theories of social change there that you are both hoping to be involved in curing what I think Dr. Farmer would term this structural violence, but figuring out where health fits into this paradigm, and how to whether you emphasize agriculture or housing or education or health seems like a very big question. I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on where you see health in the broader challenge of global inequity.
Well, I think both, maybe going to be surprised again by how much overlap there is, because we've had occasion to discuss this at length over the past few years. Neither group believes that good health is going to happen without economic development, without clean water, without jobs. And so finding your best way to break the cycle of poverty and disease, if you're a group with particular expertise in agriculture, then use that. But one of the things I've seen in this world of the development world set is that the people are sort of fighting over very scarce resources. So you'll have people saying, no, you're investing too much in health in Tanzania. You should be investing more in agriculture. When in fact, what we really mean to say is you can't break this cycle without agriculture, water, roads, jobs, gender equity, et cetera. And since we agree on that, what we've tried to do is parse a little bit what it is each of the partners is going to do. We're less involved in agricultural work in Rwanda because of the Clinton Hunter Development Initiative, and very much more involved in it in Haiti. Now, I'm interested to hear you say that a small fraction of our work, given my writings about structural violence. By the way, those are not mandatory reading at Partners in Health. I mean, I know my mother has read them, but I'm not so sure about my coworkers. But I would just say, I regard investing in jobs. We have 2,500 jobs in rural Haiti. They're not great jobs, but we're the biggest employer in rural Haiti by far. So to me, that's another way to advance the struggle against structural violence, just by creating jobs. Now, they have to be jobs that have some, our country, my country, is, I think, 80% now service, I don't know, what's it called? 70% of the jobs are in the service sector. So I don't know enough about economics to say that it's a bad thing or a good thing. What I do know enough about is you can't break that cycle of disease and poverty without attending to ill health, without attending to dirty water, to malaria, to HIV, without TB. I've never seen it done in any case. And we're just reviewing, I teach at Harvard Medical School, and in class today we're reviewing a classic study of the decline of tuberculosis in England and Wales in the 19th century, before the advent of proper therapy for the disease. But of course, it didn't go away in the rest of the world. It was the leading infectious killer of young adults until it was surpassed by AIDS. So until we work together in partnerships that address agricultural, trade issues, let's call them, or economic development and health at the same time, we're not going to break this cycle, I don't think.
So we're going to shift gears a little bit now. And most of the people in the audience today are students, which I think is so exciting. And I was wondering if the both of you could sort of talk a little bit about how you saw problems in global health or global poverty when you were around 20, and how you saw avenues to affect change, and how your thoughts on both issues have sort of evolved throughout your careers.
You're older, you start.
I wasn't older till I met him, and then I got older. I guess when I was that age, we had a different problem with the Vietnam War that was going on that preoccupied us. I was about to say that's different from today. Unfortunately, it's not different from today in some regards. But I think the question of poverty, and we also were concerned very much about poverty in this country, which back in the late 60s and early 70s was even more severe than today, and also had a racial component to it that was based on discrimination and various other things that we were very much involved with. So things that you all take for granted today, you know, my first activism was going down to Mississippi in the mid-'60s, and when I was still a senior in high school, and trying to work on civil rights as a senior in high school in the United States, and being involved in civil rights organizations in the U.S., and then anti-Vietnam War organizations, so on. So at that time, there was a different set of issues that we were directly concerned with. But what I would say today, those issues still remain, by the way. I mean, issues of inequity in the United States that have to be addressed, which have gotten worse over the past 6 years, not better. But globally, I think your generation is going to face a couple of issues which are going to be defining issues that you really need to confront. And one is this issue of global poverty. As the globalization takes place, it is going to be simply untenable to have, you know, 2/3 of the people in the world getting poorer, which is what has happened. I mean, globalization has been good for a certain segment of the population across the globe, but the vast majority of people have gotten poorer in the world over the past 20, 30 years. That's not sustainable. And so what we're doing, and what hopefully a lot of you will do, has to address that set of issues with respect to healthcare and development in poor countries in the world. Also, the issue of climate change, which the Clinton Foundation is now involved in, is going to be a fundamental issue for your generation. It is coming upon us much faster than we understood 10 years ago. It's something where we're already going to suffer some negative repercussions. But if we don't stop what we're doing now, if we don't cut by 70% the emissions that we're putting into the air now, the dire consequences that you're going to experience will get worse and worse. And so that is an issue that has to be addressed by us and by your generation. So these are things which you can't escape, and which hopefully we, and then you following on us, will take on as issues and help solve.
Well, I'm 47 now, and you know, the generation that Ira refers to, you know, engaged in activism around the war, the Vietnam War, engaged in the civil rights movement. By the time I went to college, that was over, unfortunately, in my view. And there were on college campuses some stirrings around what was going on in Central America back in say 1980. But that's, and I would like to just say again to the people who organized this, the student groups, it's so impressive. I mean, I got a link yesterday. I came back from Nicaragua last night, and I made a mistake of logging on to my computer and also logging on to the Stephen Colbert report. Actually, if I could brag, speaking of public service, I went right from the airport to the law school and heard Brian Stevenson talk about public service law, and that was great. But what I was thinking is I logged on, and one of my colleagues, Alice Yang, had sent me a link to the announcement for this evening. So it said YouTube, and automatically if I see something that says YouTube, I think I won't understand it, it'll be too complex, I won't know what button to push. But I did it successfully, and I was jolted with this beautiful, jazzy, high production value advertisement tonight, and I thought, oh my God, do they know they're getting these two guys, the like squarest guys on the planet? Anyway, the other thing I did was watch the Stephen Colbert report, and it was funny. Okay, it's true. You know, I've been gone. I've been in Africa for 3 months. I miss the United States, of course. I miss especially the popular culture, which is a shameful thing to say on tape at the Institute of Politics. But by the way, that's what we do to distract ourselves in the field. You know, is to watch DVDs of bad TV series. Anyway, so last night I watched it, and they made a mistake, I think, about your generation. And it was supposed to be funny, you know. It shows this kid getting tasered at poor John Kerry must have been mortified. But then he did a spoof, not on this aggression in a forum like this. We're not going to get tasered, are we, guys? I mean, and he made up a word. He says word, and up comes a word, and it was what was the word, guys? Solitarity, as opposed to solidarity. And he was making fun of the people sitting around this young man who was being aggressed by the, citizens of the peace, I guess. And they were just sitting there looking bemused. And he said, these people can't wait to get back to their room. They don't want to help the guy on the floor. They want to get back and blog about it. Now, if I was very funny, but and it's true that there are these, in addition to globalization that Ira mentioned, and the forces that are different, there are also information technologies that you have that we did not have when we were 20. Connie, back to your question. I got involved in this work at the same age that Ira did, quite young, and that's why we can recommend this so wholeheartedly to you, to people when they first show up, to high school students. But we didn't have the tools, and I also think we didn't have the sophistication, certainly not to make such a groovy, that's not even a word you guys have ever heard, groovy advertisement for tonight's event. I don't think we had the knowledge and sophistication of the world that I've seen. Now, granted, we're spoiled. We're around places like Brown or Harvard and teaching in U.S. medical schools, but I've been all over the world and all over this country, and I know Ira has too. And I think that as funny as Stephen Colbert was last night, that he's wrong, that there is solidarity, a lot of it in this generation. And it's not just local solidarity, but it's much more global. And with the problems that Ira mentioned, including things about which I know little, but I'm trying to learn, climate change is what's on my mind, of course. You just know that none of these problems is going to be could be solved without engagement of young people. And I think activism is the way to go. Public service is the way to go. And there's many ways to do it. You can be it doesn't mean you can't to be a public service lawyer, for example, back to Brian Stevenson's example, that doesn't mean you can't be a corporate lawyer. He happens not to be a corporate lawyer. He works full-time on death penalty cases, but he works with other people who, some of them are professors, some of them are corporate lawyers who support the work or do pro bono work. I think we have to have a big tent approach to problems that are this big as well. And I think this generation also embraces that, is not sectarian, is not as rigid about who's going to be involved in this work. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm optimistic about this generation.
It's amazing to hear you talk about like the wide umbrella that the public service could possibly take. But I think one question that a lot of us have that facing or considering public service careers is, when we look at, especially at not only people like you, but especially people who work in your organizations on the ground, either here or overseas, is that it seems like a very difficult road, and that to sustain your level of commitment and enthusiasm and to plug in day by day. Is that something that comes naturally, or is that something that's natural? And do you ever have doubts about?
Really, Matt, it's the opposite. I mean, if you're doing something you believe in, that's the easiest road. And no matter what you go through in the service of that, if you can achieve success at things you believe in, that gives you energy. I think what's difficult for so many people is when they get trapped in jobs where maybe they make a lot of money, maybe they achieve a lot of success, but it doesn't really provide meaning for them. And for me, this is whatever your spiritual orientation is, or your values. I mean, you can look back historically for thousands of years, and the common thing you find most in religions is a sense of service to the poor, service to the sick, service to those less fortunate, as being part of the ethical foundation of what's there. And if you have that set of values, and then you're living those values, that energizes you, and really everything else becomes much easier, not harder.
So, I'm going to New Orleans tomorrow, actually, just to brag about. You were saying things are different and then they're the same, but Seth Magaziner, who I met in Haiti and then went to Brown, is down there and Teach for America right now in Louisiana as opposed to Mississippi. Not that it would have anything to do with his father or his mother's influence, I'm sure. The way the Haitians put it is, pumpkins do not yield squash. But I'm going there tomorrow.
I think that's a compliment. I'm not sure.
It is. It's a great
You never
compliment.
tell with Paul. I got to think about
You know, you're going back, you're talking about the religious traditions of the world. I was asked to speak tomorrow to this will make my Roman Catholic grandmothers spin around their graves, to the Global Communion of Anglicans. We're having a rather messy time right now, I'm told. Anyway, I'm going to talk to them tomorrow, and they asked me to talk about MDGs, you know, Millennium Development Goals. And I thought, I'm not going to go all the way to New Orleans, which, by the way, I had left for Rwanda the day that Katrina got named off the coast of the Bahamas. First time back, I'm not going to go all the way back. You know, I went Rwanda, New Orleans, and talk about MDGs. I mean, to a bunch of bishops. So I just did what you just said. I looked back and, you know, and compared the. I'm not done writing this speech. Don't let me go out and wag, you know, my tongue all night and talk with my students. But if you compare the MDGs to the corporal works of mercy as laid out, say, in the Gospel according to Matthew, it's the same thing. Kind of weak on gender equity, but otherwise, you know, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, shelter the homeless, you know, on and on. It's, you know, like you said, it's ancient. And just to say, and answer your question, Matt, I don't, you know, if I had to go to a job that I did not find meaningful, I would not be able to sustain, you know, this level of engagement. It's just what Ira said. You know, you do something you believe in, you have passion for, believe me, it makes it easier and not harder.
I mean, you both speak of your passion for this work, and I mean, one question we had was just, how has it been just balancing work and family throughout all these years?
Well, his family's here. Mine's in Rwanda. And there's a relationship between that, now that you mention it. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
No.
In other words, he sent me to Rwanda, and now we're all over there, and here they all are over here. Now, I would just say it's really, you know, if you're going to get involved in global, you know, in work that reflects the challenges of global poverty, and you're going to work with poor people, and you're going to work in post-conflict situations, then of course you are going to, you know, bump into all sorts of difficulties. I mean, that's part of the nature of this work, working again against injustice and struggling against poverty. It's difficult work. But it's, again, just to echo what Ira said a minute ago, it's inspiring, and what keeps you going. I would also add, you know, my daughter, I just saw her, we had a meeting last week, an all-staff meeting at Partisan Health. You haven't seen this, Ira, but she and another PIH founder, Jim Kim, his son, they spent a month with us in Rwanda this summer, their family, and Lori Wen, who's a filmmaker, I think she's here tonight, she did a 6 or 7 minute film interviewing these two kids about the hospital in Rwanda and you should have heard them. And they were saying, you know, they're having a conversation to each other, really. But, you know, I was beaming with pride when I heard my daughter say, well, you know, you can't really take care of the destitute sick and just give them medicine. They need food, too. And Thomas saying, yeah, they have to have food and clean water. And my daughter's saying, and, you know, they need decent surroundings, like gardens. Anyway, so if you're lucky, and I think we've been lucky that your families support this work and care about it and maybe do it themselves as well. How'd I do?
That's good. No, I think it is a difficult question, and I think a lot of our people face that question, and what it means sometimes is people will come into this work for some number of years and then move out of it into something more traditional that makes it easier to be family-oriented and then come back into it. And that's one way to deal with it. I think, you know, what we say to our people, and it's been joked about, but we mean it, is that your job satisfaction in this job is not our first concern or even our second concern. Our first concern is saving people's lives. Our second concern is building the capacity of people in countries, poor countries, to save their people's lives. And your satisfaction comes from making a contribution to that. And even if any given day is difficult or frustrating or whatever, you know, a number of years later, you can look back and know that you've made a difference. And I think and I know Paul will echo this, I mean, what probably is the most important motivator. I say to all the people that work with us, and both of you have volunteered with us, so you know this, that you ought to get to know some of the people and family whose lives you're helping save, and the families that you're keeping together, and the kids whose parents you're keeping alive. Because these are real people, and as you get to know them as your friends or people that you associate with, the questions about what are you doing and why are you doing it, and did you have a difficult flight or something, become irrelevant. I mean, here are people whose lives are rich and meaningful, good people, and they are living because of you. That makes the rest of it go away. President Clinton, who's often good at phrasing things, was asked by Larry King, saying you could be off playing golf, and why were you sitting? We had just come back from Zanzibar, where we were sitting in 110-degree heat in a building meeting with people living with AIDS group that had been set up in Zanzibar, the first group of its kind there. And they said, why are you doing that? And he said, when you look into the eyes of a child whose life you help save, life doesn't get any better than that. And playing golf, you can't compare the two things.
Just for one final question before we turn it over to the audience, I know a question on a lot of our minds here is, we thought about careers, we thought about like the big challenges in global health, but what is it that students can do now in your own mind? I mean, are there, from the efforts that you've seen currently, from your own experiences as students, and maybe for your position now, where there are avenues where students could contribute concretely, and or is this something where students really focus on preparing themselves for the future?
We have about 100 student interns that worked with us last summer, most of them abroad, and working with our programs. And they were very helpful. And so there's real work you can do now where you can be helpful. And in talking about family, I mean, I'm very proud of the fact two of my children are here tonight, but both of them, one is now working with the foundation, and the other was volunteering with us this summer for some time in Cambodia and so on. There's plenty that you can do now to be of help, and we would welcome having you, come work with us.
I would just add that we're kind of both walking advertisements for student activism. And so to delay engagement, it doesn't matter to me what you call it, activism, service, but to delay engagement by saying, well, you're preparing yourself to do something for the future, I think could be a mistake. I think it would have been a mistake for me to say, well, I think I'll just wait till I'm done with X. What would that be? Undergraduate training, medical school, my PhD, my internship, my residency? So then you're 30-something years old, and if you haven't developed the habit of engagement in activism or service, I think it's not the way to move forward. And I'm very troubled. We didn't really talk much about the war, but there's some very troubling things happening in the world that, in addition to the acuity of a war built on lies and the chronicity of global warming or some of the diseases that we're taking on, or the chronic lack of access to the basics, that is clean water, primary education, healthcare. These are serious problems, and delaying your engagement in them one way or the other would be certainly bad for us, because we'll be shorthanded, but I think it's going to be really bad for the planet. And so, although we don't have 100 internship positions, we also built our organization out of student involvement. And we share interns now, but I'm just saying I think what you guys put on today is part of it as well. It's educating the community, it's having conversations, and that I've worked with HAC for 3 years now, and I know that you've taken seriously the job of teaching each other and learning from each other. So I think that postponing things to get things just right in your education is not going to be good for the planet.
Mr. Magaziner, Dr. Carr, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your wisdom. We're going to move to the Q&A now. We have 45 minutes, and there are
How's the weather up there?
There are 4 microphones located around the room. Out of respect for the other members of the audience, please keep your questions brief.
one of the most disheartening and
Oh.
truly saddening.
Sorry, one thing. Can you please state your name and sort of, if you're a student, where you're from?
My name is Felipe Jane. I'm a student at the medical school. And one of the most disheartening and saddening statistics that I recently came across was from the Organization of Economic and Cooperative Development that said that in 2006, the real contribution of the US to official foreign development assistance was 20% lower than it had been in 2005, and that we had reneged on our commitments at the Monterey Consensus in 2002 by over 60%. We'd essentially, and rank second to last amongst all of the industrialized nations in the percentage of income that we give. So if we are interested in putting issues like this on the agenda, which, you know, the total would be like $90 billion, we talk about PEPFAR and 15 and 30 billion, or Stop AIDS and 50 billion. But to get that kind of money, how can you actually, like, what methods have you found to put your interests into the realm of public discourse most effectively, if that's what the avenue you want to take?
Well, first, you know, the statistics you cite are correct, and they are very disheartening as an American. And they're even worse than that, because a very high percentage, over half of all the money that we spend on aid as a country, never leaves the United States. It goes to fund US consultants to do studies and to fund overheads and things of this sort. So even of the money that we are spending, a very small percentage of too small goes actually to direct assistance within the countries it's aimed at. I think what Americans need to understand, and I can't quite say this as well as President Clinton does, but you know, in an interdependent world that, like we live in, if you can't, you know, sort of kill or jail all your enemies, then you have to get along with them. And you have to find a way to right wrongs globally in order to preserve your own way of life and your own security. And you know, John Kennedy's famous statement about you know, freedom is equally applicable here. That as long as you have so many people in the world that are so poor and that can't enjoy the fruits of the advancements in technology and economy that we've experienced in parts of the world, as long as there are so many have-nots in the world, your way of life is never going to be secure in the United States. And I think ultimately that's what Americans have to come to understand. And other countries in Europe now are stepping up, and they're going to 1% of their total incomes to be spent on foreign assistance. And we need to do that here as well. And I think many of you can make a difference in that. The kind of, I think, lobbying effort you're going to be asked to make tonight, for example, is a good way to show that students care about this kind of issue.
Notice he's a med student, one of my students. I just want to add one thing. It was actually not the point of your question, but brought up by Ira, and that is that, you know, the amount of the funds that actually never reach the poor. That's actually why we started working together, is because we, in addition, our primary purpose is to do the work that, you know, integrated healthcare, rural development, et cetera. That's a huge task. But I have to say, both of us and many of those who work with us are also keen on rethinking foreign aid so it doesn't look so lopsided and embarrassing. You know, some of the budgets of the new malaria projects that we've gone to Washington to try and push for are far worse than 50% not getting, you know, to bed nets, medicines, or something new. It's something like 70%. I think it was Celia Duggar from the New York Times who estimated that some of the malaria projects, I don't know which ones, you'd have to look it up and see if I know I got the name right, but she said about 5% ever hits a rural village in Africa. So 95% doesn't. I think that's her number. But I mean, that's your generation's job too, to want to be different. So the big push is we need to get the resources out there. First order of business is to stop something like AIDS. You need medicines, you need resources, you need money, you need prevention tools. But there comes a time we say, okay, let's make sure we do this better, leaner, and not just end up looking like the way development has looked for a long time. I think that's another urgent priority.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name's Leah Schwartz, and I'm a freshman at the college. And my question is specifically...
Which college is that again?
This one.
Oh,
Yeah. My question is specifically about the AIDS crisis. So you've suggested, and it seems like the work that you've done that has been so successful in Haiti and in Rwanda and in several other countries has been so successful because of the partnership that you've created between the infrastructures that already exist there, the governments that exist there, and the foreign aid workers who might come in and the funds that you bring in, et cetera, et cetera. But how do you propose solving the AIDS crisis in places like India and China, where billions of people are literally suffering, they're HIV positive, but there might be more resistance to foreign aid workers, especially from the United States?
Well, first of all, we work in India and China, and President Clinton went to China in 2003 and spoke at the first public AIDS conference ever held in China. And he embraced a young man with AIDS up on the stage on Chinese TV. And we actually have people now from the Clinton Foundation working with the Ministry of Health in China and also in a number of the hard-hit provinces, helping them scale up care and treatment. And the Chinese government is now moving on the problem. It doesn't mean that they're solving it immediately, but they are moving on it. And the same thing in India. We have a very active program in India, working with the National AIDS Control Office in India and the Indian Ministry of Health. And the program is getting traction now. The number of people in treatment since we started 2 years ago has gone from about 5,000 or 10,000 now to well over 150,000, and it's continuing to increase. And with children, we started treating children just last year, and we'll be up to close to 20,000 this year, and so on. So these countries are moving. They're large, complicated societies, and present a different set of problems than you see in Africa. In India, we're training literally hundreds of thousands of doctors in rural areas in what AIDS is and how to recognize it and so on. And we're also working in Vietnam and Cambodia and Papua New Guinea, a lot of other countries in Asia. So I think it's possible. And as I say, I mean, most leaders want to do what's best for their countries. And I remember sitting with President Hu Jintao, with President Clinton, and when we first went, and he wanted to talk to us about trade, which we did, and North Korea, which we did. And then we said, we want to raise something with you, and began to talk about AIDS. And what we described was what had happened in Southern Africa, where AIDS had gone from, in the early 90s, about 3% of young adults infected, up to 18% in some countries, then 25%, as a sort of silent growth as it spread from populations of intravenous drug users and sex workers through mine workers and truckers and soldiers back to their home communities and so on. And we said, in China, you have maybe 1 million people infected right now, and maybe they're on the margins, of society, as you would put it. But if you let this thing go, within 10 years, you could have 100 million people infected or 300 million. And, they understood it, and within 2 months, they started moving on an AIDS program. So I think these other countries are moving, and, we work all around the world and are trying to provide whatever assistance we can to those countries. And what we find, again, it all comes back to the question of respect. If you go in, as many Americans do, with a bias that says, oh, India's bureaucratic or China's, authoritarian or whatever, and you're going to try to impose that kind of bias from the lens here, then of course leaders in those countries are going to say, we don't need you to come here and lecture us. You've got your own problems. We see this in global warming now. I mean, we can talk to the Chinese, as we do, about global warming, but they turn around and say, look, you generate 24 tons per person in the United States of greenhouse gases. We're generating 2 or 3. So yeah, we've got a problem and we need to face it, but don't come here and lecture us until you're solving your own problem. So if you go and you go in a respectful way and say, look, we've been fighting this disease longer because it came to the United States first before it came to China, so we have some expertise that might be helpful. We found them to be very welcoming of that help, and as long as we work under their leadership in a proper way, it's been a very good partnership both in China and in India.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here tonight. My name is Ann Garachari, and I'm in my second year here at the Kennedy School in the Masters of Public Policy program. In Lesotho, Partners in Health has pushed for opt-out testing of HIV/AIDS, by which the patient must actively ask not to be tested. Concern has been raised about the impact of this policy on individuals from groups associated with stigmatization. How do you respond to this criticism?
Well, it's an inaccurate criticism, first of all. That's not what opt-out testing means for us. Opt-out testing means something along these lines. You come in for prenatal care, and we say, these are the recommended tests for prenatal care. No one has to take any test that they don't want. So, you know, and I have to say, the criticism that you're referring to have not ever, in my experience as a physician, because we do opt-out testing not in Lesotho, but everywhere we work, because we know that there's only one treatment for HIV disease, and that's antiretrovirals. And in order to provide them, you have to know if someone's sick, and then you have to stage the disease with more tests, like CD4 counts. So we're comfortable. We're not, you know, burdened by anxiety around that. Those critiques never come from patients or their families. They always come from our peers, people who've, you know, been to, say, Kennedy School, Harvard School of Public Health, Georgetown, you know, Brown, someplace like that. And the people in the activist community with whom we've worked for many, many years, they by and large get it. You know, I remember 20 years ago, I mean, I'm still against mandatory testing. Because you know, mandatory anything is not the way to advance a public health agenda, in my view. But let me just say one last thing about this, and I'm glad you brought up the question. It's an important question, but it's just a little bit more, I hate when professors say this, a little bit more complicated. If what we saw back in the 80s in Haiti, we put in 1986, we were the first clinic to put in free HIV testing, serology, in rural Haiti. There was another place in Port-au-Prince that did it, but I think I'm right in saying we're the first ones. And we also recommended it, I forget what year, but when AZT was shown to be effective in preventing the transmission from mother to child, we found what happened was acceptance rates of HIV testing, this is when we're doing opt-in, and we were being kind of, you know, people didn't, we were cowed a little bit by people saying, no, you have to spend, you know, 20 minutes doing this, and then you have to ask the patient, you know, would you like to have a test today, or maybe next Tuesday, or 3:30, or she come to your house and fill out some more forms. We were doing all that goofy stuff back then, because that's what we, you know, the way it's done here. What we saw was about 30% of patients in the prenatal clinic would be tested. When we introduced AZT, also for free as a public good for public health, that figure went over 90% in 1 year. And when we introduced opt-out testing, it's well over 99% in all those countries. Okay, Lesotho, Rwanda, Haiti, they don't have anything in common culturally. They have a lot in common structurally. And what I'm really saying here is you introduce treatment that is dignified, high quality. We want our treatment to be just as good as what you get at the Brigham and Women's Hospital or the Mass General. Certainly better than the Mass General. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm at the Brigham. It's a little joke. You know, that's, I think, what you need to do is link prevention and care. And what happened for many decades, of course, is these were separate issues. You know, there was VCT, freestanding volunteer counseling and testing. We've integrated all that and you know, and had very good support from the Clinton Foundation, which is, of course, much larger than Partners in Health in terms of its scope. So we've very strongly recommended integrating prevention and care and making sure their high-quality services are available as a public good for public health.
There's one thing I would add to what Paul said, and I agree with what he said. Actually, it was the government of Lesotho that decided they wanted to do opt-out testing and try to make it universal. And so we worked with them in doing that. It's not so much something that PIH came in and said, you know, you have to do this. The government of Lesotho wanted to do it. And Paul made a very, very important point that I want to emphasize. When we first started in 2002, there were all these studies out there. And we had a fight, I can't tell you how much, we had a fight to get people in the academic community in many places and among donors, governments, to accept the idea that you should do treatment. Because at that point in time, the view was, oh, it's 30 times more effective to do prevention than treatment. And they were setting up a false dichotomy, which when you really got beneath the surface was, well, poor Africans die all the time, so what are you going to do? But the argument was, at that time it cost $1,200 per person per year to treat somebody. Countries with $300 or $400 per capita incomes, you can't afford it, so too bad, you just do prevention. And that was wrong morally, but it was also wrong in actuality, because as Paul said, what we found is that prevention became impossible. And anybody in the countries would tell you that when you didn't have treatment, because what's the point of going and getting tested if you're just going to be told you're going to die? You'd rather be in denial and not even think about it until you get very sick. And the biggest thing that fights stigma is when people aren't sick anymore. I mean, what creates a lot of the stigma in many countries is when people are sick. And when people see examples of people that are HIV positive, who are now healthy, living normal lives, it's not the whole issue, but it's part of the issue that helps fight the stigma. So from our point of view, testing is crucial, and treatment and prevention go hand in hand.
Hi, my name's Jonathan Steinman, and I'm a sophomore at Harvard College. First of all, thank you very much for coming. I wanted to ask you about your statement that seeing the lives you've saved, seeing one face smile back at you, makes it all meaningful. I'm personally very involved in environmental work, and I find that one of the great frustrations is not being able to do that. And moreover, when you tell people, hey, help me out, hey, do something, they say, well, look at China, look at all these factories. How do you get simple things done for where you can't just tell people, well, here's somebody's life you saved? How would you address that?
It's a very good question, and we face that in our climate initiative. I would say that there are two pieces to what you just said. The one is, what can we possibly do because somebody else causes the problem? And the answer to that is you can affect what you can affect directly. And if everybody has the attitude that says, well, because China's not moving, I'm not going to move, then the Chinese have the attitude, well, because the United States isn't moving, we're not going to move, then nothing happens. So what you've got to do is call people to their own personal responsibility over what they can affect. And I think in terms of, you're right, the immediate impact isn't there. And what's most severe about the climate change, when you had, when we were fighting back in the 60s or 70s to deal with sulfur dioxide or nitrous oxide in the air from smokestacks, you could smell it. Or you could see particulate matter in the air, so people could respond to that. The problem with CO2 and methane going into the air is you can't see it, you can't smell it, but it's killing the planet. And so getting people to understand that and act on it is a lot harder, but we got to do it. And you got to basically keep coming at people with all of the evidence that's there, and try to paint the picture for people in a way that's very immediate. I mean, this is serious, serious stuff, and it's going to start being upon us in 10 or 20 years. In your lifetimes, in the lifetime of your children, there are going to be major events that will, cause untold havoc on the human race if we don't deal with this problem in the next 10 years. And it is very, very urgent. And I think, you're right, it's harder, but we got to get that message across to people.
I also think it's a great question. And I know that we're, in some ways, work that I do, because I'm around. I just went to recommended to you. We had a photograph. I didn't have anything to do with curating this, so I can brag about it. It's a photographic exhibit at the Mass College of Art on the 11th floor. Go by and take a look at it. And it may make you think, wow, this is going to be even harder, because look at all these pictures of people who are doing well or doing poorly. But photographs and other vivid experiences about individuals, they do help make a case, of course. Like you said, just to use the example that President Clinton did, looking in someone's eyes, knowing that you've helped them in some ways, it's got to be the most gratifying thing there is. But Matt was good enough to reference some of the stuff that I've written about, which is really about this more invisible these structural problems. And I think if you're a sophomore in college now, get your toolkit stacked full of everything you can, because global warming and environmental racism, for example, do impact individuals' lives. families' lives. They damage people, they destroy people, people's lives, they undermine. So there is a human face to that in one way or the other as well. But then also marshaling the data, as Ira said. I know much less about it, but I got to tell you, over the last few years, just hearing my friends, also interested in public health, talk about global warming has really, stimulated a lot of interest. And that was not from meeting individuals who are affected directly so much as hearing friends who really say, hey, look at these data. But I think you got to pack that toolbox of activism full of everything you can.
And there are some visual things. I mean, if you can take maps now that exist from satellites that show the desertification that's taking place. They show 20 years ago the world, and you see all these green areas, and then you look at them now, and they're all brown and becoming desert and arid and so on. Or you look at the ice caps melting and how fast they're melting in Greenland and other places, and you show people the differences in 20 years. It at least, and then you can talk about the oceans and show the effect on marine life of some of the oceans now turning acidic for the first time in 3 million years, and the killing of marine life, and show that. That does tend to unnerve people because they can see that major changes are taking place fast, and that can tend to unnerve people. So those are some of the mechanisms we
Plus,
use.
we're on your side. Because if there's not, those of us who are looking in the child's face, we're not going to have kids, these people aren't going to be around if we don't link up to that issue too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Marcel Moran, and I'm a freshman at Harvard College. And in Mountains Beyond Mountains, there was a lot of content about how there are problems not politically or structurally, but also from the people that needed the care because of their religious beliefs. And my question is, have you had any situations like that in Rwanda, not legal problems or because of the political structure, but because of cultural or religious beliefs of the people that need the care?
Well, I have a hard time parsing those categories, which you'd think I wouldn't, since, as Matt said, I did a PhD in anthropology right at this very institution. So I'm supposed to know what culture means and what, but it's very difficult in real practice. Well, say, for example, you meet a family in Rwanda, and or a health worker doesn't want to see this family, and then you find out it's because they're from different ethnic groups that have been pitted against each other. Is that culture? Or is that history? Or is that political economy? Because it's something that's happening in a field of social scarcity. So I think everywhere that I've been, everywhere without exception, I have found socially constructed problems. It's just that I'm not so sure that they're cultural in the sense that I thought when I went to grad school. And they're social, certainly, but they're also economic, and they have historical roots. They may be related to Belgian colonization, of Rwanda. I'm just giving you an example from Rwanda. And then you might see just the opposite of what you'd expect around religious or cultural values. One of the things that we've seen in Rwanda, and Dr. Bosco can talk about this too, is that the health worker structure that we put in place, which is the same, very similar as the one in Haiti, is a neighbor-to-neighbor solidarity effort, and it's actually caused healing, between families. So I think, in answer to your question, yes, I have seen these everywhere I've gone. I've seen them in Roxbury, I've seen them in New Jersey, I've seen them in Haiti, I've seen them in Siberia in a prison. But what they are exactly is still somehow hard to get my arms around. I'm not so sure I'd call them cultural so much as socially constructed.
I think whenever you're doing any kind of attempt at social change, you got to try to meet people where they are, and meet where they are with respect, to start with. I mean, you can't sort of get into a thing where you're sort of holding yourself out to be superior because somehow what they're thinking or doing is backward. I mean, you got to meet them where they are and then try to work with that. And it doesn't always succeed. It doesn't always succeed in this country.
So if I meet a Haitian who thinks that tuberculosis is caused by sorcery, maybe you'll meet someone here who tells you that Iraq has weapons of WMDs. There are all kinds of errors in every country. Thanks.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for answering all of our questions and for being here. I'm Naomi Odell. I'm a medical student, but I'm also a student at the School of Public Health here. And as well as that, I'm a returned Peace Corps volunteer. So I've had the privilege of working with other Americans who have the same attitudes and passions that you've mentioned have been part of the success of your organization. Respect, collaboration with governments, wanting to work at the grassroots level with the people. However, the Peace Corps model is now about 40 years old and is not always as successful as it hoped. And I was hoping you would highlight a few of the two or three main things about your organization and collaboration that have really answered to the needs of the world today differently.
You know, I don't know if I can speak well enough about the Peace Corps and its model now. But I think in terms of what we're trying to do, Paul has already mentioned some things. I think what brought us together, first and foremost, was a shared set of values, not just about what we were trying to accomplish, but also the way we were going to go about it. And so, you know, little things about that turn out not to be so little because they're very much noticed in a country. When, you know, our people don't go fly in business class, you know, we fly.
Can I get
in
upgraded
coach
though,
class.
please, just once in a while? I use frequent
You
flyer
can use
miles.
your own miles to upgrade. But we, you know, but it says something because I can save the lives of 20 kids for the difference between one business class fare from the United States versus a coach fare to Africa. And when you put it to somebody like that, you know, you can't justify taking scarce donor money and putting, and we stay, you know, tend to stay in modest places when we go into the country, and we don't, you know, a lot of times organizations are setting up barriers. You know, they'll go in and they'll hire away some of the best people from government, double their salaries, and put them to work for them, you know, which sends all the wrong messages. You're weakening the mainstream infrastructures in a country in order to allow you to accomplish your own project. So there are a variety of cultural things that show that you're trying to make something that's sustainable, that you don't hold yourself out to be better than the people that you're working with, that you're not interested mainly in yourself or your own comfort or your own career or, you know, patting yourself on the back for what you're doing. I mean, this world of AIDS, when we first entered to it, it struck me that it was the meetingest group of people that I've ever seen. You know, all these meetings in Geneva and Brussels and New York, and you don't need all that. It's just extra overhead. And then they would, to make it worse, they would insist, you know, if you want our money, Minister X, you got to come up to the meeting in Geneva, and you're taking the minister away from his or her job, you know, what they have to do in their own country. And so there are signals you send in the way you go about working, which are very important. We proudly pay our people about 1/3 of what USAID pays its people, and we still attract the best people. Because most people who are doing this kind of work, what they really care about is getting something done. My favorite quote about us was in Fortune magazine from one of our people, a quote that I'm not sure Fortune had seen before, when sort of asking, well, what do you really like about working with the Clinton Foundation? And he said, well, they get shit done. And that's really what people are motivated, is that, you know, you're going to do this kind of work, you want to get stuff done. And so when you're, and you know, Paul has set probably as good an example of as anybody in the world of this, and he's been at this a lot longer than me in the developing world. But we really modeled ourselves on Paul and a lot of what he set up in PAH, in the sense of working with communities, being respectful, not having a high overhead operation, not, you know, patting yourselves on the back, acting with humility when you act in a country. You know, the volume of press releases that organizations put out, you know, celebrating what they're doing in the developing world. I mean, it's just not right. It's not the right way to do things. You shouldn't be doing this stuff in order to publicize yourselves. You should be doing it because it's meaningful work. So, and things like that are noticed by the people you're working with, and it affects them greatly in the way in which they regard you and in your ability to be effective. So, you know, those are some things that, I'm not sure it's a formal model, but those are some things that I think characterize both the way we both work that makes us comfortable working together.
I agree. And if you're here up this year, please join us, you know, come over to Partners in Health or any class that I might be teaching, and we could talk more about, sort of the public health of the future for a physician like yourself. I think he's made the list, and looking at specific instances, places, situations brings more complexity, but that's the list I would make too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mihir Gupta. I'm a sophomore here at Harvard College, and I'd like to say thank you for being here. My peers and I are really inspired by the successes both of you have had in your work, but at the same time, I'd really like to know if there have been any instances where you did not succeed or had to really rethink one or more projects you were doing, and any lessons you had for those of us who are going into this work and are going to face challenges, successes, and failures.
Well, in the arena of healthcare, Ira has never had any setbacks, so I think I'll take this. That's a 35-year-old person joke. No, actually, let me not be arcane. Ira has been struggling for national health insurance for this country for a long time, and that's something we didn't talk about. But it's a good kickoff point for me, because I'm an American physician, and there's an obvious failure for American physicians of my generation. We have 47 million people without insurance. We're spending more. I mean, Ira knows this stuff, so I'll let him talk about defeat and failure. But actually, I was being serious. In every project we've ever had, we have had defeat and failure. When you have, I just thinking, because I have my guest here. In our first week out in Ringwabu, there was no electricity. This is a place in Rwanda. There's no electricity. There was no hospital there, no beds. And a guy who had been a nurse, he had survived the genocide. We were already there. We'd been there a week, I think maybe 2 weeks, but I don't remember the dates. But we had no excuses, because we had brought in meds, and we started getting sheets and beds and things like this. And his two of his siblings and two of his siblings died that week. This is an employee, and maybe not an RN, but a licensed practical nurse. And see, to me, that's a defeat. And you could say, well, if you hadn't been there, then what? So the answer is absolutely. And when those become, when those add up, people quite naturally, and Ms. Odell, future Dr. Odell, who was just speaking, and from the Peace Corps, you have experience like that. If these add up, then you can feel quite defeated. But the one thing that has been exciting about working in partnership, we have many partners. We're always partnering with the Ministry of Health for the reasons I laid out. But I have to say, the Clinton Foundation is our major partner. And one of the things that's been exciting to me as we grow more rapidly than we have in the past is that there's more people to share the worries and defeats. And the defeats end up being smaller, and the victories end up being larger when you're working together. So if you look at the program for Step Up for tonight, you'll see groups, collectives, and their names are right here. These are people who have decided that, yeah, we'll risk defeat and disappointment and maybe even despair, although I don't think that's entirely appropriate for a Harvard undergraduate. But it's worth taking those risks, because with a collective action like this, with partnerships, that's why we called it Partners in Health 20 years ago, there's going to be more victories than defeats. And if there aren't more victories than the defeats right now, then we have to keep pushing so that there will be.
I'd like to just say two things. The way I've always tried to live my life, and I'm going to give you two pieces of advice as students, even though you haven't asked. One is that if you don't fail at a number of things in your lives, then you've not lived up to your potential. And I'll explain that in a second. And the second thing is, if you haven't pissed off people in authority a number of times in your life so that you become very unpopular with a number of people, you also haven't lived up to your potential. So, now you can go home and tell your parents what you learned tonight. I've got to fail and I've got to piss people off. But let me just explain briefly. A lot of people live their lives and they're very risk averse, and they always want to succeed at what they do. And so they take on small things and succeed at them. And at the end of their lives, they have a sum total of things that, when you really add it up, doesn't amount to as much as perhaps they would have liked, even though they've succeeded at almost everything they've done. What I'd rather do is try things that are big and important and that will make a difference if you succeed. But they haven't been done because they're hard. And when you do that, you're going to fail sometimes and fail big. But you're also going to succeed sometimes. And when you do succeed, it's going to be stuff you can be proud of and where you've really made a difference in the world. And so, and sometimes, you know, in healthcare, we're going to get a second chance maybe. But basically, I would give you that advice to really push yourselves and try to do the hard things, even if it means you fail sometimes. And the pissing people off part is that if what you're going to set about, and it's after all what we are about, is trying to change things where the way human society is functioning is not the way it should be, right? When things are not the way they should be, and you need to bring change so that you're an agent of social change or economic change, invariably you're going to anger people, because inherently people that are part of a current power structure or a current way of doing things, or just an innate conservatism, a comfort with the way things are, means that when you try to bring about significant change, you're going to anger people. You're going to upset a lot of people, and they're going to fight you, and you're going to be unpopular at times. And so you need to face that in your lives if you're really going to make a big difference in life. And one of the things that, you know, has always attracted me to Paul is that, you know, beyond having a good sense of humor and his irreverence, but he basically has not been afraid to take on entrenched power and also to speak truth to that power. So it's easy for people to say, you know, Paul Farmer, okay, he's living in a hut in Haiti and he's doing all this good health work, and everybody can sort of say, isn't that great? You know, but Paul didn't stop there. I mean, he basically wrote books and got engaged in talking about the fundamental issues of poverty that make elites uncomfortable, and fundamental issues of social change, economic change, that go beyond just treating people who need treatment. And that's a courageous thing for him to have done, and one reason why I admire him so much is because he's willing to take on the hard battles, not just the ones that everybody will shake their head and say, isn't that nice? So again, I'm sorry to divert from your question, but yes, there are failures, as Paul said, constantly in what we do. But the most important virtue that, you know, I've always tried to tell my kids, and I'm sure they're tired of hearing me say it, is resilience is the most important thing, right? You can't always succeed in life. I have this great chart that actually President Clinton also has on his wall, listing all of Abraham Lincoln's failures. You know, he ran for this and lost. He ran for that and lost. Went into business and went bankrupt. And he kept coming back and coming back and coming back, and eventually did great for this country. And so being resilient, because you're going to fail at things if you try to do hard things, if you try to make a difference in the world. Being resilient and learning from your failures, bouncing back, and then having successes is probably the most important characteristic you can have. And those of you living in Boston and being Red Sox fans, you know this well.
A final question?
Hi, thanks for being here. My name's Sam Bonzi, and I'm a sophomore here at Harvard College. And some people who spend time in developing regions of the world come away disillusioned with the work that NGOs are doing there. And I wonder if you might respond to the criticism that some NGOs, or many NGOs, maybe all NGOs, though well-intentioned, can often do more harm than good.
Well, you know, I think, you know, picking up on the theme of courage in discussing these matters, first we need to acknowledge that that is so. We, because we're non-governmental organizations too, we can do more harm than good. And since we're in a university, I'd recommend a book to you that was published in 2002 by Cornell University Press called, I think it's called Doomed to Repeat, but I do remember the author, Fiona Terry, from Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, and she wrote a very good, I thought, balanced review of some of their difficult times when they thought, you know, for example, in Zaire after the genocide in Rwanda, we did more harm than good. That was this might not be her words, but that's the conclusion. So first courageous thing is what you've already done, is to say, because a lot of people don't know that. They don't go off to work in NGOs, you know, in some poor country thinking they could do more harm than good. But finding that out is no small achievement to understand that. So I wouldn't make, it's only when that defeats you and you don't say, okay, how can we make an NGO that never does more harm than good? That's one of the good things about this being trained in medicine, is you're taught from the beginning that you can always do more harm than good. And as many of you know, the ancient, motto of medicine is, above all, do no harm. So NGO people really do need to learn this. And it's maybe the most urgent task that people in NGOs need to learn, because there are many NGOs. I've read Lori Garrett said there are 60,000 AIDS-related NGOs. Don't know if, where the number comes from, but I'm sure she got it from somewhere. Anyway, there's a lot of them, and we can do harm. So, but the next, and this is how we ended up collaborating. If the next step is to say, well, why did we do harm? How can we avoid doing harm? And how can we do something really radical, good? Are there ways that we can describe how NGOs function in a bad way or a good way? Of course there are. And that's one of the things you can do while you're here. You said you're a sophomore. And if you already know this as a sophomore, then spend some of your time, I would encourage you, look at the literature, the critical literature on NGOs. It's already emerging from all over the world in many different languages. Some of it's angry literature, some of it is PAP, but a lot of it's serious scholarship and worth knowing. And then finally, if you would choose, and I hope you do, to remain involved in public service, whether you work in government or in NGOs or both, as we're doing, because we're working with governments, that's what we need. Is we need this new generation of critical thinkers who are not assuming that only good will come out of desire to do good. That's going to be damaging to the cause, in the big C cause. So I think, use this time wisely. Talk to people on the faculty, your peers who are willing to be honest about how really weak, underperforming, and sometimes downright damaging NGOs can be in these places, and take that not to some new cynicism, which again is not appropriate to people here. Shouldn't be cynical. Take that instead to recraft your own engagement with this work. Would be my advice.
Yeah, I'd just add 2 words. I mean, I think the important thing is what Paul said at the end. I mean, we're all human. We all make mistakes. The important thing is to learn and to be really serious about it and to have humility. And I would say the most important thing that will, in my experience, determine the difference between an NGO that's on balance doing more good than harm versus the opposite comes down to this question of humility. That, too many times there's arrogance, or it's more about the people themselves rather than about the people they're serving. If you keep focused on the people you're serving, what's best for them, try to be diligent about learning what works and what doesn't work and what you're doing, I think you can do much more good than harm. And you just got to, like anything else, you got to work at it. You got to learn from your mistakes and have some humility about what you're doing.
Thank you all for your thoughtful questions. Now, before we say a final thank you to Dr. Farmer and Mr. Magaziner, as mentioned earlier, we're going to take a few moments to do a Senate call-in on the African Health Capacity Investment Act, which was introduced in the spring by Senator Durbin. It's now a bipartisan bill, which would, with the support of Partners in Health, which would commit $600 million for healthcare workers in Sub-Saharan Africa. A sample script will be projected onto the screen above, but it is also printed at the sheets on your seats. And the sheets also include the DC phone numbers of every member of the Senate. Of course, no one is in any way required to make this call, but if you would like to do so, please, at the moment, take out your phones to place a message on your senator's voicemail. Whether or not you choose to do the call-in, please remain seated for the next 2 minutes out of respect for those who do choose to make the call. And yeah, thank you. Mr. Weiss, do you think it's about time?
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. I believe Dr. Farmer has the final word.
Oh, yeah, I would just like to make an announcement. Take 2 seconds. On Monday, September 24th, we're having at Harvard Medical School having a conference on children and AIDS. And my colleague Lori Wen is out there, has this flyer, so you're all welcome to come. Next to there's another conversation with positive youth activists. So I hope you don't mind, since this is a set up to favor student activism, I hope you don't mind me commenting on these two things.
Great. And we just wanted to say one final huge thank you to our two panelists, Dr. Paul Farmer and Mr. Aaron Alexander. And